actually planted a weeping deodar cedar that's been trained to have a nice serpentine curve to it. It still has its original shipping stake on it, and I see this a lot in the garden. Whenever a plant is shipped with a stake, that's simply to support it during the shipping. We have a nice example here of a Japanese maple that still has its support. It even has the wrapping around the base. This is just to support it for shipping. When you put it in the garden, you want to remove every support method that's been put on it, the tape, the stake, and the wrapping. If it needs to be staked, do that separately. The other thing I want to do is look at, before I get started here, I want to look at the garden location and the orientation. This one's been planted a little bit too perpendicular, and I want to open it up a bit so that we could see that S-curve from the primary viewing point. So I've inserted some rebar stakes into the ground that I'm going to use for supporting it. Now I want to start by removing this old support system and just cutting it off and pulling that bamboo stake out of the ground. And actually, when I do this, you can see how the old wrapping has kind of dug into the bark in a couple of places because it was real tight. It's just meant to support it for shipping, and then we want to remove that. Okay, now I'm ready to support it, and I'm going to use this stretchy green tape. And the bottom part of this trunk I want to be nice and straight, so I don't want to pull it over and support it here. I want to maintain that straightness and then find a nice spot after it curves to tie it onto my rebar. And I'm just going to tie it as tight as I can. The tape does stretch a little bit, but I will want to come back periodically to check it, because we saw what can happen if it's left on too long. We don't want that to cut in. Okay, and now I want to look at this curve. And as I mentioned, it's curving a little bit towards the front of the garden. I want to open it up a little bit and give it a nicer curve. This still has a lot of growth on it, so we want a nice serpentine trunk over time. So I'm going to stretch it out to here and tie it onto my other rebar stake. And I pulled that rebar stake back to shift the direction. And right now, the rebar stake's going to be really pulling it this way, but over time the trunk's going to stiffen and have this angle naturally, so we won't have to worry about staking it once we get our shape. You can see that there's some nice branching at the bottom, and I really enjoy this. Right now I'm not concerned about it. As the shape develops, if we find that that's competing, we can prune it out. Now my next branch doesn't quite make it back to my stake, so I need to let it grow a little bit more. We'll come back later and secure it across to continue this serpentine pattern. We'll also recheck these ties and put on new ties so that they're going to be a little bit looser as that stem grows. This is a nice little project to express your creativity in the garden.